Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, December 7th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The game against Michigan in 357 days. The first ever selection Sunday for the 12-team college football playoff. Well, that is one day away. Before we get there, we got a bunch of football to watch. I know. Not the worst thing that you've probably ever had happen to you, but you have to sit and watch a couple interesting days of football before we get there. And so today we're going to be taking a look at what is Ohio State's rooting interest in all of these games, because the Buckeyes could potentially move up in the rankings a little bit. Theoretically, they could move down, not too likely, but also maybe they get an easier path through the college football playoff potentially. So we're going to be doing a video version of the old tip sheet column that both Tony Gerdeman and I wrote over the years, first at the Ozone and then other stops, including BuckeyeHuddle.com. Going to welcome Tony in, but first, let's run through real quickly. We'll throw up a graphic with here's where things stand right now going into the weekend's games. Oregon, the number 1 seed, Texas, the number 2 seed, SMU currently slotted in as the number 3 seed, Boise State currently slotted in as the number 4 seed. Those 4 teams, as things stand right now, would have a first round bye. The first round matchups would be number 12, Arizona State at number 5, Penn State, number 8, Ohio State hosting number 9, Tennessee, number 6, Notre Dame hosting number 11, Georgia, and number 11, Alabama, and number 7, Georgia hosting number 10, Indiana. So that's where things stand right now. However, there's a whole weekend of football that can screw all of that up, and there are some outcomes that would be better for Ohio State, some outcomes that would be worse for Ohio State. So we're running through all of those with Tony. Tony, we're going to start with one that this is probably not a real direct impact on Ohio State. But UNLV and Boise, that one kicks off Friday night at 8 on Fox. Boise State, a 4.5-point favorite. It could impact potentially which of the league champions gets a first-round bye, depending on who is ranked where after all is said and done this weekend. This one doesn't feel like one where it's a real direct impact on Ohio State one way or the other, but should be a fun game to watch.
Yeah, it'd be a fun game to watch as you're watching basically Boise State play for their playoff lives. They lose, they're out. We've seen in the past where, many, many years ago, like Nevada eliminated them from some sort of contention before, way back when, and now facing UNLV. If UNLV wins this, then are we assuming the Mountain West is out? Is this?
No, because UNLV is ranked ahead of Army right now, I believe, and Army is playing an unranked Tulane team, so odds are UNLV would finish ahead of whoever wins the American. So I'm assuming the winner of this game is probably in, and then it's just a matter of whether Boise State gets a bye or UNLV is the 12 seed.
Yeah, whether they're 4 or 12, basically, yeah.
Yeah. So not a ton at stake there in terms of the Buckeyes. Could potentially see one of those teams as a semifinal matchup if they win a couple other games, which not super likely, but at least a possibility. So next up, Iowa State against Arizona State. That one's Saturday at noon on ABC. Sun Devils favored by 1.5 right now. This is another one that feels like this is much more about which team potentially gets a first round bye in terms of the conference championship, not anyone that's likely to be a first round matchup with Ohio State one way or the other.
Yeah, this is just something that Ohio State may stumble into in happenstance, basically down the road, where it's like, oh, isn't this fortunate to be able to run into one of these teams somehow that they've gotten so far? But again, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch these. These are playoff games. The playoffs have begun this weekend, and we're going to get to see what happens and what shakes out, because the winner is in, and there's a ton on the line, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah, this is basically game 163 in baseball, where one of these teams is moving on, one of these teams is going home, but you don't know which one, and you don't know exactly where they're going to slot in the college football playoff. So yes, it is going to be some high stakes football that you can probably just sit back and mostly enjoy as an Ohio State fan without having too much on the line there. Now we're getting into the games where you do have a real significant rooting interest. Next one up is the SEC Championship. That is Saturday at 4 on ABC. Texas favored by 2.5. This one, Tony, is the first one to me where there is a very clear rooting interest for Ohio State and potentially a decent amount on the line.
Yeah, this is one where Buckeye fans are going to be rooting for Texas and in hopes that would drop Georgia and move Ohio State up, if that's what you want. And again, moving up and down is nice in theory, but let's see what the matchups are. That's when you'll know whether it was a fortuitous bounce up or it's like, it would have been nicer to stay at 8 against 9. But this is one that is definitely going to impact Ohio State's run. And we'll see if Georgia can continue their domination over Texas, or if Texas can get the revenge for the loss they had this season to the Bulldogs.
So that is the SEC. We'll see. You have the potential to Ohio State, if they can move from the 8 seed to maybe the 7 seed. As of right now, that would mean you go from playing Tennessee to playing Indiana. You would figure Ohio State would be a bigger favorite against Indiana than against Tennessee. That might also slot you in where you could face Texas in the second round instead of Oregon. That, again, that's a little bit of taster's choice in terms of who you potentially want to face there. You're probably not getting a super easy second round game, but you may have an opinion one way or the other in terms of who you'd rather face as Ohio State. So that's something that's on the line there. Next up, Tony, this is maybe the most convoluted one, and it's the Big Ten Championship, and it's Penn State versus Oregon. That's Saturday, 7:30 p.m. on CBS. Oregon favored by 3.5 points, which seems low to me, which makes me wonder what I'm not seeing there. This is an interesting one because if Ohio State stays at 8, you'd rather have Penn State win, because then you potentially play Penn State in the second round rather than Oregon. Buckeyes already won on the road at Penn State without Josh Simmons by a touchdown. And then they went on the road and lost to Oregon by 1. And Oregon feels like they've gotten maybe even better since that game. So, if Ohio State stays at 8, you'd rather have Penn State win. But then if Oregon wins by a bunch, then Ohio State could potentially jump Penn State and get an even easier path. And then you move up to the 7 seed, or potentially maybe even the 6 seed, if both Penn State and Georgia lose by a decent chunk.
Yeah, is this not 5? This is basically 5 stages of bargaining, where you go straight to the bargaining, and it's like, okay, this will be okay either way, whichever happens. Then you just, okay, this was actually beneficial. This was the one that I didn't know what I wanted, but once things started happening, this is the one I wanted. But I also think that we're going to see a lot of people rooting for the underdogs in this. I'm expecting a pretty pro Penn State crowd there. It looked like tickets were as low as $12 earlier in the week. I think you can get them now for like $20. So it's going to be a lot of Penn State fans driving over and Oregon fans waiting for the next round, I think. So could be a nice environment there for the Nittany Lions. And they've been a while since I've been there, so why wouldn't it be?
Exactly. And for Penn State, yeah, it's a big deal to be there. And for Oregon, it's a flight, and you're potentially looking at a flight for the quarterfinals, and then again for the semifinals, and then again for the national championship. So you wonder how many people are really going to be willing to make that trip. Oregon got locked into this. It happened like in the middle of the week because the Big Ten kind of went, oh, right, that's right. Yeah, we figured it out, and congratulations, you made it. And so Oregon fans had a little bit of a head start in terms of buying tickets. So the fact that the tickets have not all been snapped up definitely makes me think that you're right. It probably is going to not be a particularly pro-Oregon crowd, because if they wanted it to be, they could have bought them all up, but they didn't. So we'll see how that one shakes out. The last game is Clemson and SMU. This is Saturday at 8 on ABC. SMU favored by 2.5. But this is one where you have this very narrow pathway. I don't think this is going to be one that directly impacts Ohio State a ton, because I don't think Ohio State's very likely to end up the 5 seed. Feels like Notre Dame is more or less locked into the 5 seed if Georgia and Penn State don't get it. So probably not going to be one that directly impacts Ohio State either in the first or second round. However, there is a way that a close Clemson win, if you kind of narrowly, if you Clemson wins, but not by too much, you could get Clemson in as the auto bid for the ACC, but also get SMU in as an at-large. SMU in a couple spots ahead of Alabama, so you figure a close loss shouldn't drop them completely out of the rankings. So this feels like one where you can just root for the underdog in SMU. Well, I guess theoretically they're not the underdog, but no one's rooting for Dabo Swinney. So, you could root for the slight favorite, the historical underdog, let's call them SMU, or you can root for Clemson to. You're basically trying to shoot the moon here, where it's like, well, you want to do it, but if you do it by too much, one way or the other, then Alabama gets it.
Yeah, and it is the spiritual underdog, basically rooting for SMU in this one, which again everybody's going to do. It's the whole March Madness thing. You want to see upsets, and sometimes the favorite is the one that you think is an upset, like this one. And like you look at these two teams and be like, who do you think is the favorite? Well, clearly it's Clemson because I don't know anything about SMU, so it must be Clemson. It's like, well, actually, SMU's had a very good season, gotten even better since they changed their quarterback, and have just run through the ACC like the ACC made a mistake by allowing them. But I think a lot of conferences are thinking that they've made some mistakes, or at least the teams in those conferences believe some mistakes have been made with all of these new teams running through the conferences. But I will be fascinated to see what happens if Clemson loses or wins this game, because I just see a committee begging, just wanting Alabama in there as much as possible. And then what happens if, I know they say that you can't have teams that didn't play jump, but is there a way that Miami can get messed up even more? Probably not, but I will be a little surprised if they do let SMU in over the Alabama program. But as the committee has said in the past, and they've been reminding people that back a couple of years ago, they kept TCU in for a loss after a loss rather than putting in an SEC team. So there is some precedence there. So we'll see if it happens. And I don't know, are you expecting Clemson to win this one?
It feels like the talent is probably there. They probably have a little bit of a stronger roster on the whole, but I don't have a particularly high degree of faith in Clemson. I mean, they just lost to South Carolina last week, and it just doesn't feel like this is. You see the Tiger Paw and you think, oh boy, but they have an amazing defensive line and an incredible quarterback. It's like, not particularly, no, but they're okay. I don't know that, either one of those teams, I think I look at and go, probably athlete-wise, they're probably not going to match up particularly well with Ohio State if Ohio State somehow ends up bumping into them down the line. So you'd probably, as an Ohio State fan, rather be rid of Alabama just because Alabama has Alabama players to whatever degree that matters, and other schools don't. You'd rather see Georgia fall out. You'd rather see Alabama fall out as an Ohio State fan. But you are going to have to play some good teams. That is, sort of the unfortunate reality for everyone. Whoever wins the national championship this year is going to have the strongest resume of any team probably ever in college football, just in terms of having to beat that many good teams on top of whatever you had to do during the regular season. So where will Ohio State slot in? Well, we're going to be covering that for you. That happens at noon on Sunday. We'll have all sorts of coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Then we're going to be talking to Ryan Day a little bit later on in the afternoon. Once we know who the Buckeyes are playing and officially where they're playing, it certainly looks like it should be in Ohio Stadium. We will find out, though, for sure, and we'll find out when. Certainly looks like it should be one of the primetime games. Will it be Friday? Will it be Saturday? Well, we'll all find out together on Sunday at noon, and we'll have lots to talk about as we break that all down for you at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.